Aggregor's quest has always been a pretty standout story arc for me. Whether or not you're a huge fan of Ultimate Alien, I think pretty much everyone can agree it's got some pretty solid elements to it. Whether that be one of my favourites of aliens with the Andromeda 5, Aggregor as a villain, or the journey we follow as Ben and the rest of the group track down the pieces of the map of infinity, only to inevitably lose those pieces to a now nearly unstoppable Amalgam Aggregor. And those three elements I mentioned are sort of the foundation of this video. And if you're not familiar with this arc or Ben 10, I'll be explaining any relevant bits and pieces as we go, but for now, Aggregor is an Osmosian like Kevin with the same ability to absorb DNA, who tailor-picked these 5 alien species who weren't previously in the Matrix, though that's not particularly relevant to him, in order to absorb their strengths and abilities in order to gather the map of infinity, which would lead him to an infinite celestial sapien who he could then absorb in order to get Alien X's abilities, only without the interference of multiple distinct personalities. Whereas we'll be discussing what alien species Aggregor should have gone after, rather than the Andromeda Galaxy species we see. So let's lay down some ground rules on how we're going to approach selecting alien species. Right off the bat, as great of a planet as Aggregor was, let's assume we don't know each and every single detail of the map of infinity's whereabouts. Clearly he knows where the pieces are held, but let's assume he doesn't know every single intricacy exactly. Think of it like having Google Maps directing you, but you're not all too familiar with where it is you're going exactly. Only in this case to such an extreme that that place could literally result in your death. So our general knowledge is that we have to go to a planet entirely made of water, along with Ledger Domain, which you have a general understanding is a magic realm, but let's say we're not familiar with the goings-on beyond that. The Kelvin Temple, which as far as we're aware is just a building, and finally the Perplexahedron, which is an artificial planet that acts like a hostile maze. All under the assumption that this is the rough level of knowledge Aggregor had going in. So we're an Osmosian who has this info on where the pieces are, along with the resources Aggregor had access to. So a spaceship to get around, an army of robots, his little staff, and a machine that allows us to fully absorb a being in their entirety. Our advantage being that we have a list of Omnitrix transformations to choose from. Though if you're sitting there planning out your own amalgam form, feel free to pick from any species we see in the series that's not an Omnitrix as well. Though as an Osmosian Aggregor stand-in, we may quickly come to the realization that species like Vampire aren't really available to us, along with members of Atomics or Clockwork species, seeing as they might just be too difficult or impossible to actually get a hold of. Those two come to mind along with Way Big and Feedback being either too big or too hard to deal with. We'll also take Chromostone, Nanomech and Cannibal off the list, seeing as they're either a one-off being, an artificial transformation, or an extinct species. Other than that, we know we need someone who can travel underwater, make their way through a maze, a temple, and a magic realm. Right away, Terraspin's magic immunity would be really nice, but we're not using any Andromeda Galaxy aliens here. But that mana immunity would have been more a luxury than a necessity. Let's start out with a transformation that can breathe underwater, seeing as without that we're not getting all too far. That along with flight being an absolute necessity. And conveniently with an alien who fills both of these criteria nicely in Big Chill. We hadn't really considered an underwater alien, but is shown chasing Aggregor through the water in this arc after Aggregor gets a piece of the map. There's a more obvious answer to this with Jet Ray being more suited for both space and water, as well as being immeasurably quicker than Big Chill, but I'm showing a bit of my favoritism here and justifying it with the rationalization that he can become intangible, and that'll help us out quite a bit later on. So the first of our 5 aliens is selected, we've covered flight, we get to travel underwater and have ice powers and intangibility, so very solid start. As far as capturing one of these species, I'm certain you could use the same technology Vilgax's glove used, or the goop that Krabby used on Ghost Freak to make him tangible in Classic. Though I imagine the Necrophrygian guards at the temple might be especially hostile towards us, seeing an amalgam made up partially of their species. Speaking of, I think Big Chill is a really great starting point, but seeing as we're going up against Ben, Gwen and Kevin for the bits of the map, just the one species won't cut it in the slightest. A bit of an odd choice here, but when intangibility and ice breath aren't quite enough, I've got 2 out there picks I think would greatly improve our chances at warding off any issues, guards, or even the main trio with my next pick. That being Topic. They're an unknown species, but I'm sure we'd be able to track one down to absorb it. Not a lot to this one, you'd probably have to use their Eldritch Horror powers to frighten guards at the temple, along with anyone who got in your way really. And for anyone who makes their way around that, my next pick is to cover a little bit more ground, and again, a bit of favoritism on my part with Pesky Dust. I figure as long as we've got access to a gas mask, we should be able to manage capturing a member of this species. We've already got flights, that's a bit of an overlap, but oh well. The Sleep Dust is more what we're after here, particularly against the main trio. Where if you're cornered, you'll be able to shoot that dust out, put them to sleep, and ideally enter their dreams, interrogating them and getting a better grasp on what they know. And if not, just generally great to make them fall asleep and run off to the next piece. I'm aware this is slightly out of order as far as the way Aggregor went about it, but to reiterate and keep track of where we're up to, we've got our first piece from the water planet, the second from the temple, then we're onto the Ledger Domain before the Perplexahedron. Here's where our limitations around Chromostone, Terraspin and Feedback start to take a bit of a toll. We don't have any particular answers for magic users, so let's try and find a workaround. My first inclination was either to outmuscle every magic user or go for something a bit secure feeling like with the worst, using his invulnerability to our advantage. But for the sake of it and a bit of a revision to the rules, I'm going to restrict that transformation. Maybe the worst is so invulnerable that the absorption just wouldn't work on them. If you're playing along, feel free to use them, but I'm going to give them a miss since my last pick feels so brutal. I fear the combination might make this less interesting. Though if we're chasing pure efficiency, I'd choose the worst. Instead, we'll go for a sort of workaround option, which I thought might be through a speed blitzing Adwasia for the room with someone like Accelerate, Fast Track, or Jet Ray. But rather than that, let's try and get a hold of either Chameleon or Prison 775 species for their invisibility. A generally pretty handy tool. There's a workaround to it, but if we find ourselves in a similar situation to Aggregor with Adwasia mid-fight, sneaking up and pinching the piece from him might be the go. I'm now realising I've created a sort of hypothetical Osmosian villain as a replacement to Aggregor, not just selecting new species for him to absorb like I was originally planning for this. Lastly, we've got the Perplexahedron. I think we're pretty well equipped at this point, but I get one more alien to choose from, and as a bit of versatility, we're going for duplication. I think Ditto was a more fun choice than Echo Echo and seems easy to get a hold of, but for efficiency, let's grab Echo Echo. So now we've got an Amalgam, Big Chill, Topic, Pesty Dust, Chameleon, and Echo Echo. So as far as tackling the Perplexahedron, a maze becomes easily solvable the more attempts you have, particularly if all those attempts are happening at the same time with copies of you able to work in tandem, and particularly if those copies are able to become intangible and fly about, either frightening off or putting anyone you come into contact with to sleep. And for an easy escape, if intangibility isn't enough, you can just become invisible as well. As far as any other species I considered going into this, I feel Upgrade would have come into the mix nicely, seeing as the Perplexahedron is artificial. I see no reason as to why you couldn't use his ability to assimilate with the planet entirely. The only hesitation I have there is never seeing an Amalgam Kevin ever really use this upgrade ability. Maybe since only part of your body is that, even with Aggregor's machine that gives you 100% of their ability, does mean that only that part of you that is upgrade looking can go goop mode and fuse with technology. I'm imagining in the case of an Amalgam form, that part of you can use that power, but the rest of you stay separate. So let's say your arms, the necromorph part, they could fuse with the machine but still remain attached to you. Otherwise, I consider Swampfire, or even to a lesser extent Wildvine, is a really great foundation, largely for their ability to regenerate from nearly nothing, along with Swampfire's general versatility. The two I hadn't really considered before we got to this point were Grey Matter and Brainstorm species. It's a pretty great way to min-max the system. Using either one of them as a foundation would only make you use the other species' abilities more efficiently. And as our last little honourable mention, Gutrot's ability sort of spoke to me in line with Pesky Dust and Topic as a great little utility pick. Now from here we've just kind of achieved the same result as Aggregor, only this time not even necessarily with more ease, but much more efficiently. While Aggregor felt much more like a juggernaut, feeling nearly unstoppable and unimaginably durable, but less wacky and versatile as my choices. I'd like to say it's more versatile, but the Andromeda 5 are so much so that it's sort of hard to get a more even spread of abilities. My choices here are certainly more bombastic and focused on overwhelming others and obstacles rather than making sure we're bulletproof here. In actuality, in a head-to-head fight with Ultimate Aggregor, I'm not all too sure on how this would play out in our favour, other than possibly overwhelming him with the numbers. But even then, he's so durable, I don't know how many duplicates we'd need. Your best bet would be putting him to sleep or freak him out with the scary Topic bits. But seeing as we're the Aggregor replacement in this scenario, let's plan out from here. So we've absolutely swept the pieces of the map of Infinity. No major issues. Maybe at worst we've had a hard time getting the piece from Legend Domain. And maybe we've had a slightly harder time on the water planet, but even then, multiple copies who can go intangible and invisible makes it hard to fail. So we make our way using the map of Infinity to the Forger creation, and I'm liking our chances of succeeding here. Let's say events have played out as they did with Aggregor somewhat. We've bested the main trio quite a number of times now. But at this stage, they've either gotten gas masks, or Ben's choosing aliens who wouldn't be affected by the sleep powder, Kevin's metal or whatever, so he's not taking the dust anyway, and maybe Gwen has a mana field or even creates a big mana fan each time we try and blow fairy dust their way. And they've learned that each time the Topic helmet creaks open, not to look and just blindly swing at us. Which leaves us with invisibility, which I'm imagining they've gotten an idea about by now, either using Gwen's ability to track or Ben using Wildmutt or something. So all we've really got left to rely on is duplication and intangibility. I'm seeing a pretty great chance here if we just send in 10 duplicates straight towards the baby Celestial Sapien, praying that we don't get stopped. Though events playing out as normal, I'm still picturing an Amalgam Kevin getting a hold of us, absorbing all of those powers right out from under us, and even if we have a bunch of duplicates, I'm imagining he'd dispatch of those with enough ease that none of them would make it to the baby. Though if one did, great, we've won. I'd like to know what your thoughts are here, how you think my picks will play out. I'd really love to hear how you'd approach your alien selection and how you think it'd play out. If you're still watching at this stage, please consider subscribing. I very much appreciate that. Otherwise, thanks for watching.